I was arranging fresh almond blossoms in my kitchen vase when the phone rang that birthday morning. The best gift you could give me would be if you just died and disappeared from my life forever. Elena hung up before I could even breathe. 43 years of my life. 4.8 million pesos invested in her education, her home, her every dream. I set the phone down carefully and walked to my bedroom desk, opened the bottom drawer with steady hands. There was something there she had completely forgotten about, something I'd protected for decades. I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I actually smiled. Then I picked up my address book and called my lawyer, scheduled an appointment for that same afternoon. 2 hours later, I was signing papers that would change everything. My name is Carmen, and that phone call was the beginning of her biggest mistake. That drawer contained the original deed to Elena's house, the one I'd bought for her 12 years ago with my teacher's pension savings. 750,000 pesos, paid in full. I'd completely forgotten that I'd kept the original documents when she insisted on handling everything else. I sat there holding those papers, remembering the day I signed them. Elena was 31 then, newly divorced, crying in my kitchen about how Marcelo's father had left them with nothing. She held my granddaughter Sophia on her lap, while 7-year-old Miguel colored at the table. "Mom, I just need a fresh start," she'd sobbed. "Somewhere safe for the kids." I'd walked to the same drawer that afternoon and pulled out my retirement account statements. Decades of careful saving. Money I'd set aside thinking maybe someday I'd travel, or fix up my own little apartment, or even just have the security of knowing it was there. Instead, I called the bank the next morning and arranged to withdraw nearly everything. The house hunting took 3 weeks. Elena had very specific requirements. It had to be in the right school district. It needed a big backyard for the children. The kitchen had to be modern, 3 bedrooms minimum, 2 bathrooms, a garage. When we found the perfect place on Maple Street, she walked through it like a queen surveying her future palace. "This is it, Mom. This is where we'll finally be happy." I remember standing in that empty living room, writing the check. My hand actually trembled as I signed my name, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what I was giving up. Elena was already planning where the furniture would go, talking about paint colors, discussing fence repairs with the realtor. She hugged me exactly once that day. A quick squeeze before she rushed off to call friends about her new address. The paperwork was complex. Title transfers, insurance policies, utility connections. Elena handled most of it, she said, to spare me the hassle. What she actually did was have everything put in her name only. Everything except that original deed, which somehow stayed filed away in my drawer. Maybe the lawyer's office sent duplicates. Maybe Elena just missed that one document in her eagerness to claim ownership. For 12 years, I genuinely forgot about it. Elena never mentioned it. Why would she? As far as she knew, the house was entirely hers. She refinanced it twice, took out a home equity loan, even put it up as collateral for Marcelo's business ventures, all without ever realizing that, legally, I still held the primary claim. But that wasn't my only sacrifice. The teaching position I'd turned down still haunted me 20 years later. The district had offered me the math department head position at Lincoln High School. Better pay, better benefits, a chance to shape curriculum for hundreds of students. I'd been so excited about the possibility of finally using my master's degree in educational administration. Then Elena announced she was pregnant with Sophia. "I'm scared, Mom. I don't know how to do this alone. Could you maybe help me with childcare when the baby comes?" Just until I figure things out. Just until she figured things out became 3 years. I called the school district the day after Elena's announcement. "I'm sorry, but I need to decline the position. Family obligations." The principal was understanding, but disappointed. "Carmen, we won't have another opening like this for years. You sure about this?" I was sure, or I thought I was. Elena needed me. The baby needed me. Family came first. That's what good mothers did, wasn't it? They sacrificed their dreams so their children could pursue theirs. Those 3 years stretched into 5 when Miguel started having problems at school. Elena was working part-time at a dental office, barely making ends meet. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you pick Miguel up from school every day? Maybe help with homework? The after-school program costs too much, and I think he really needs family support right now." Of course I said yes. I rearranged my substitute teaching schedule to be available every afternoon. I helped Miguel with math problems at my kitchen table, while Elena worked late or went out with friends. I packed his lunches, attended parent-teacher conferences, drove him to soccer practice on weekends. By the time Miguel got settled and Elena felt stable enough to handle things alone, the department head position was long gone, filled by someone younger, someone without family complications. I was 58 then, still young enough to pursue leadership roles, but I'd been out of the running for so long that the district saw me as just a substitute, reliable but not ambitious. The financial calculations I'd started that birthday morning kept running through my head like a broken record. $750,000 for the house, $42,000 for Elena's community college degree, $68,000 for her car payments over the years because she always needed something reliable for the children, countless grocery bills, utility payments during her lean months, medical expenses when her insurance fell short, clothing for the grandchildren, school supplies, birthday parties, summer camps, soccer uniforms, piano lessons for Sophia, art classes for Miguel. Every time Elena called with another need, another crisis, another opportunity that just required a little financial help, I opened my wallet. "Mom, Sophia needs braces. The orthodontist says if we don't fix her bite now, she'll need surgery later. It's $12,000, but I can pay you back when I get my income tax refund." "Mom, Miguel made the select soccer team, but the fees are $1,500 plus travel expenses. This could be his chance for a college scholarship someday." "Mom, my transmission died. I know I still owe you from last time, but I can't get to work without a car. Could you maybe help with the down payment? I promise this is the last time." It was never the last time. There was always another emergency, another opportunity, another reason why Elena needed help, and I was the only person who could provide it. Over 43 years, those individual requests added up to more money than I'd ever owned at one time. Money that could have secured my own retirement, funded my own dreams, given me the independence that I was only now beginning to understand I'd lost somewhere along the way. Sitting there with that deed in my hands, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of awakening. A recognition that I had more power in this situation than I'd realized. Elena's cruel words that morning had shattered something, but they'd also illuminated something else. All those years of giving and sacrificing had created not just financial dependence, but legal vulnerabilities that Elena had never bothered to understand. I called my lawyer, Margaret Sullivan, and scheduled an emergency appointment for that same afternoon. Margaret had handled my will and a few other minor legal matters over the years. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, someone who understood family complexities without getting sentimental about them. "Carmen, you sound upset. What's going on?" "I need to understand my legal options regarding some property I own, and I need to understand them today." Margaret's office was in a small building downtown, the kind of place where lawyers actually returned phone calls and remembered their clients' names. I spread the deed across her desk, along with several other documents I dug out of my files. Bank statements showing the original payment, insurance records in my name, tax documents that Elena had been filing incorrectly for years. "Well," Margaret said after reviewing everything, "this is interesting. Your daughter has been operating under some significant misconceptions about property ownership." That was the moment I understood that Elena's birthday cruelty hadn't just hurt me. It had awakened something I'd forgotten I possessed. Not just financial assets, but legal rights. The power to make decisions about my own life and property that I'd been giving away for free, assuming that good mothers were supposed to sacrifice everything for their children's happiness. But I was beginning to understand that what I'd called sacrifice, Elena had learned to call entitlement. And that was a lesson I was finally ready to correct. The pattern had been there all along, but I'd been too close to see it clearly. Every conversation with Elena followed the same script. First, she'd call with urgent warmth, asking about my health, my day, my plans. The concern lasted exactly long enough to establish that I was fine and available to help with whatever crisis had prompted the call. Then came the transition. "Mom, you know how much I appreciate everything you do for us, but..." Or, "I hate to bother you with this, but..." Or, "I know you'll understand because you love your grandchildren." The problem was always urgent, always financial, always something that required immediate action from me. Elena never asked if I could afford to help. She never suggested alternatives or offered to solve the problem herself. The assumption was that I would say yes, and the only question was how quickly I could make it happen. When I did say yes, which was almost always, Elena's gratitude was brief and perfunctory. "You're the best, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you." Then she'd hang up, and I wouldn't hear from her again until the next crisis arose. No follow-up calls to see how I was managing financially after helping her. No updates on how the problem was resolving. No invitations to family dinners or grandchildren's school events unless she needed something else. The few times I'd tried to say no over the years, Elena's response was swift and devastating. She'd become cold, distant, cutting off my access to Miguel and Sophia until I relented. "I guess you don't really care about your grandchildren's future," was her favorite weapon. Or, "I thought family was supposed to help each other, but maybe I was wrong about what kind of mother you are." Those words always broke me. Within days, sometimes hours, I'd call back with apologies and offers to reconsider. Elena would graciously accept my help, but the punishment period would continue for weeks. Canceled visits, unreturned phone calls, a subtle but clear message that my love was only valuable when it came with financial support. I'd learned to anticipate her needs, to offer help before she asked, hoping to avoid those painful periods of rejection. When Miguel needed new school clothes, I'd suggest a shopping trip. When Elena mentioned car troubles, I'd casually bring up my savings account. I became my own daughter's financial stalker, desperately trying to purchase continued access to my family. The manipulation was so smooth, so consistent, that it felt like love. Elena was brilliant at making me feel needed, important, irreplaceable. She'd tell friends and family members what a wonderful mother I was, how generous, how devoted to my grandchildren. She'd post photos of gifts I'd given them on social media, with captions about being blessed with the most amazing mom. But the praise was always connected to my usefulness. I was wonderful when I was solving problems, amazing when I was writing checks, the best mom ever when I was sacrificing my own needs for theirs. When I wasn't actively giving, I became invisible. Elena would go weeks without calling, months without visiting, years without asking about my dreams, my health concerns, my own financial worries. The birthday incident wasn't actually unusual in its cruelty. What was unusual was my reaction to it. Something about the timing, or maybe just the accumulated weight of 43 years of this pattern, made me hear her words differently. Instead of feeling hurt and rushing to apologize for whatever I'd done wrong, I felt curious. Curious about what would happen if I stopped playing my assigned role in this script. Curious about who Elena would become if she couldn't rely on my automatic compliance. Curious about who I might become if I stopped defining my worth through my willingness to be used. Sitting in Margaret's office that afternoon, I began to understand that what I'd experienced wasn't unusual family drama. It was financial and emotional abuse, perpetrated by someone who had learned that I would accept any treatment as long as she occasionally reminded me that I was needed. The legal consultation revealed the extent of my leverage, But it also revealed the extent of my vulnerability. Elena had been making financial decisions based on assets she didn't actually control. The house payments, the refinancing, the equity loan. All of it was legally questionable because the property title was more complex than she'd understood. Your daughter could potentially lose everything, Margaret explained. If you choose to exercise your rights as the original purchaser, you could force a sale, demand immediate repayment of the equity loans, or simply reclaim the property entirely. And if I don't, then you continue to be financially responsible for a property that someone else is using as collateral for debts you didn't approve. Elena's financial problems become your financial problems, whether you want them to or not. That was the moment I realized that my choice wasn't between being a good mother or a bad mother. It was between being a victim or taking control of my own life. Elena had made that choice for me when she decided that cruelty was an acceptable response to my love. I decided to make some choices of my own. The plan came together over the next week in 4 distinct phases. Margaret called it financial reorganization, but I thought of it as finally learning to play chess instead of checkers. The legal phase started immediately. Margaret filed papers to clarify the property ownership and to notify all parties that any future financial decisions regarding the house would require my written consent. She also prepared documents that would allow me to reclaim the property entirely if I chose to do so later. We're not taking action yet, she explained. We're just establishing your legal position clearly so that Elena can't claim she didn't understand the situation. The notification letter went to Elena by certified mail. It was polite but firm, explaining that recent financial irregularities had come to my attention and that I needed to exercise my legal oversight responsibilities. Elena had 30 days to provide complete financial records for the property and to seek my approval for any existing loans or liens. The financial phase was more complex. I had accounts scattered across different banks, most of them jointly held with Elena for convenience. Over the years, she'd convinced me that it would be easier for her to help with my banking if she had access to my accounts. What I hadn't realized was how much access she'd actually been using. Margaret recommended a forensic accountant, David Park, who specialized in family financial disputes. David's analysis took 3 days and revealed patterns I'd never noticed. Regular transfers from my savings to Elena's checking account, often just under the reporting limit. Cash withdrawals that I couldn't remember making. Automatic payments for Elena's bills coming directly from my accounts. She's been treating your money like her money for years, David explained. It's not technically illegal because you gave her account access, but it shows a pattern of financial dependency that goes far beyond normal family support. We opened new accounts at a different bank, ones that Elena had no knowledge of or access to. My pension payments were redirected, my savings were transferred. Within a week, Elena went from having access to my entire financial life to having access to nothing. The logistical phase involved preparing for Elena's inevitable reaction. Margaret advised me to document everything from this point forward. Phone calls should be recorded if possible. Text messages should be saved. Any face-to-face conversations should be followed up with written summaries. Your daughter is going to escalate when she realizes what's happening, Margaret warned. People who have been financially dependent often react badly when that dependency is threatened. You need evidence of how she handles this crisis. I bought a small recording device and learned how to use it. I organized all my financial documents in clearly labeled folders. I wrote detailed summaries of conversations and interactions going back several years, trying to establish a pattern that would be visible to outside observers. Most importantly, I prepared alternative living arrangements. My friend Dolores had always said I was welcome to stay with her if I ever needed space from family drama. I packed a suitcase with essentials and stored it in my car trunk. If Elena's reaction became too intense, I wanted the option to leave quickly. The social phase was the most delicate. I needed to prepare key people in my life for the changes that were coming without giving Elena advance warning through mutual friends or family members. I told my sister Ruth that I was reconsidering some financial arrangements with Elena and asked her not to discuss my business with anyone else in the family. Ruth was surprised, but supportive. She'd never liked how Elena treated me, but she'd kept her opinions to herself to avoid family drama. "It's about time," Ruth said when I explained the situation. "That girl has been walking all over you for years. I didn't know how bad it was financially, but I could see how she talks to you." I spoke to Miguel and Sophia's teachers, explaining that there might be some family changes affecting the children's living situation, and asking them to keep me informed about any significant behavioral changes or academic problems. I didn't provide details, but I wanted to make sure someone was paying attention to how the kids handled whatever was coming next. Finally, I prepared a letter to Elena. Not the kind of emotional plea I might have written in the past, but a clear, factual summary of my decisions and the reasons behind them. Margaret reviewed it to make sure I wasn't creating any legal problems for myself. The letter was 18 pages long. It included specific examples of financial abuse, detailed accounting of money I'd provided over the years, and clear statements about my new boundaries. It explained that I was reclaiming control of my property and my finances, and that future family relationships would need to be based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. "Take as much time as you need before you send this," Margaret advised. "Once Elena receives it, there's no going back. She's going to know exactly where she stands, and she's going to react accordingly." I kept the letter on my kitchen table for 3 days, reading it every morning with my coffee. Each time, it sounded more reasonable and less cruel. By the 3rd day, it sounded like something someone with self-respect would do. Someone who understood that love shouldn't require the complete sacrifice of personal dignity. On Thursday morning, I mailed it. Certified delivery, return receipt requested. Margaret said Elena would probably receive it by Saturday, which meant I had the weekend to prepare for whatever came next. I didn't have to wait long. Elena called Saturday night at 11:30, clearly awakened by whatever she'd read in the letter. Her voice was shaking with rage and something that sounded almost like panic. "Mom, what the hell is this letter supposed to mean? You can't just take back money you gave us years ago. That's not how family works, and that house belongs to me. I've been paying the mortgage for 12 years. You've been paying a mortgage on a house you don't own," I replied calmly. "I kept the original deed, Elena. You never actually owned the property. That's impossible. The bank wouldn't have given me loans if I didn't own the house. The bank made a mistake. It happens when paperwork is complicated and people don't verify ownership carefully. Margaret says it's going to be expensive for you to fix." Elena's voice shifted from anger to the pleading tone she used when she needed something. "Mom, please. Think about Miguel and Sophia. They've grown up in that house. It's their home. You can't just take it away from them because you're mad at me." "I'm not mad at you, Elena. I'm protecting myself from you. There's a difference." "Protecting yourself? From your own daughter?" "Mom, you're not making sense. Maybe you should talk to someone. Maybe Dr. Peterson could help you work through whatever is going on." There it was. The suggestion that I was mentally unstable, confused, unable to make rational decisions about my own life. It was Elena's standard response when she couldn't manipulate me through guilt or fear. If I wasn't cooperating, I must be sick. "My mind is perfectly clear," I said. "Clear enough to see that you called me tonight to talk about your house and your money problems, not to apologize for telling me you wished I was dead." "I didn't mean that, Mom. I was upset. You know how I get when I'm stressed. I say things I don't mean." "You meant it enough to say it. And you've meant it enough to treat me like an ATM for 43 years. I'm done pretending that's love." Elena's tone hardened again. "Fine. If you want to play these games, I can play them too. But don't think you're going to have any relationship with your grandchildren if you go through with this. Miguel and Sophia don't need a grandmother who would rather lawyer up than act like family. Elena, our conversation is being recorded. Margaret recommended that I document everything from now on. Would you like to repeat that threat so I can make sure I heard it correctly? The line went quiet for almost 30 seconds. When Elena spoke again, her voice was different, calculated, like she was thinking through the implications of everything she'd said. I'm going to fight this, Mom. I'm going to get lawyers of my own. I'm going to prove that you're not competent to make these decisions. And when I'm done, you're going to lose everything. You're welcome to try, I said, but you might want to ask your lawyers how much it costs to fight someone who owns the property you've been using as collateral for the last 12 years. Good night, Elena. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the unfamiliar but exhilarating feeling of standing up for myself instead of backing down. Elena called back immediately. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times over the next hour. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Sunday morning brought text messages, dozens of them, ranging from tearful apologies to legal threats to promises that she'd change if I'd just reconsider. By noon, there were voicemails from Marcelo, from mutual friends, from Elena's co-workers, all asking me to call Elena back and work things out. The pressure campaign had begun. Elena was mobilizing every mutual contact we had, casting herself as the victim of my sudden, inexplicable cruelty. People who barely knew me were calling to tell me that family was sacred, that I was making a terrible mistake, that Elena was devastated by my rejection. She's just worried about you, Carmen, said Nancy from church. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. Maybe you should talk to Pastor Williams. Elena loves you so much, said Maria from my old teaching job. She's beside herself thinking that something is wrong with your health. Have you considered seeing a doctor? The genius of Elena's strategy was that it made her look concerned and loving while making me look unstable and cruel. People who had never seen her treat me dismissively were suddenly experts on our relationship, convinced that I was destroying my family over some kind of misunderstanding. But Margaret had prepared me for this. When people lose their financial control over someone else, they often try to regain control through social pressure, she'd explained. Elena is going to convince everyone that you're the problem, not her. The key is to stay focused on the facts and not get drawn into defending your mental health to people who don't have all the information. Monday morning brought the first formal challenge. Elena had hired a lawyer, someone who specialized in elder law and mental competency cases. The letter was professionally written, but essentially argued that I was suffering from age-related cognitive decline and that my recent decisions were evidence of impaired judgment. Elena was petitioning the court to have my mental capacity evaluated and to have my recent legal actions reversed if I was found incompetent. She was also requesting emergency financial support to prevent the loss of the family home while the competency evaluation was pending. Margaret read the petition with what looked like professional amusement. "This is exactly what I expected," she said. "Elena is trying to have it both ways. She wants the court to believe you're too confused to manage your own affairs, but competent enough to be held responsible for supporting her indefinitely." What happens next? We respond with our own petition. David's financial analysis shows a clear pattern of Elena taking advantage of you for years. We have recordings of her threatening to cut off your access to your grandchildren if you don't comply with her demands. And we have medical records showing that you're in excellent health with no signs of cognitive impairment. The competency evaluation took place 2 weeks later in Margaret's office. Dr. Jennifer Martinez was a court-appointed neuropsychologist who specialized in assessing older adults. She spent 3 hours testing my memory, reasoning ability, and decision-making capacity. The tests were actually enjoyable. Math problems, memory games, logic puzzles, discussions about current events. Dr. Martinez was thorough but kind, and she seemed genuinely impressed by my performance. Mrs. Carmen, I have to say, your cognitive function is excellent for any age, let alone 74. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is clear, and your decision-making process shows good judgment and planning. There's no evidence of any impairment that would affect your ability to manage your own affairs. Dr. Martinez's report was unambiguous. Not only was I mentally competent, but my recent decisions showed improved self-advocacy and appropriate boundary setting in response to documented financial exploitation. She recommended that the court dismiss Elena's petition entirely and consider whether Elena's filing constituted harassment of an older adult. Elena's lawyer withdrew from the case the day after receiving Dr. Martinez's report. Elena herself went silent for almost a month, apparently regrouping for whatever came next. During that quiet period, I made the decision that would change everything permanently. I was tired of playing defense, tired of waiting for Elena's next attack, tired of living in the same city where every conversation became about our family drama. I called a travel agent and booked a flight to Barcelona. One way. Departure date 2 weeks away. I'd always wanted to see Spain, but Elena had never shown interest in traveling with me, and I'd never felt comfortable traveling alone. Now, for the first time in decades, I had both the financial resources and the emotional freedom to go where I wanted, when I wanted, for as long as I wanted. The decision felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. I was 74 years old, moving to a foreign country where I barely spoke the language, leaving behind everything familiar for something completely unknown. But I was also leaving behind a relationship that had consumed my identity for 43 years, a relationship where my value was measured entirely by my willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else's convenience, a relationship that had taught me to believe that love meant accepting any treatment as long as it came from family. I wrote Elena one final letter, shorter this time. I explained that I was leaving the country and wouldn't be returning. I provided contact information for Margaret, who would handle any future legal matters. I told her that the house would remain in my name, but that she could continue living there as long as she made all payments on time and maintained the property appropriately. This is not punishment, I wrote. This is me choosing to live my own life instead of serving as a supporting character in yours. I hope someday you understand the difference. I left the letter on Elena's front door the morning I departed for the airport. By the time she found it, I was already over the Atlantic Ocean, watching the sun set on one life and rise on another. The flight to Barcelona was the longest I'd ever taken, 13 hours with a connection in New York. I'd never traveled internationally alone, never navigated foreign airports or customs procedures without someone else taking charge of the logistics. But every step felt like proof of my own competence, evidence that I was capable of much more than I'd been allowing myself to attempt. Barcelona was overwhelming at first. The language, the crowds, the unfamiliar currency and customs. I spent the first week in a tourist hotel near the Gothic Quarter, walking the streets with guidebooks and gradually building confidence in to navigate independently. The architecture was stunning. Gothic cathedrals, modernist buildings by Gaudi, Roman ruins layered underneath medieval streets. I'd taught about European history for 30 years, but experiencing it directly was completely different from reading about it in textbooks. More importantly, I was anonymous. Nobody knew about Elena or our family drama. Nobody had expectations about how I should behave or what I owed to other people. I was just an American tourist exploring a beautiful city, and that freedom was intoxicating. After a month in the hotel, I found a small apartment in the Gracia neighborhood. 1 bedroom, modern kitchen, balcony overlooking a quiet street lined with plane trees. The rent was reasonable, and the landlord spoke enough English to help me navigate the lease process. Setting up my new life required dealing with Spanish bureaucracy, but it was surprisingly manageable. I hired a translator to help with residency paperwork, opened a Spanish bank account, arranged for my pension to be transferred internationally. Within 6 weeks, I was legally established as a Spanish resident with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Elena called twice during those first months. Both times, she started with tears and apologies, then quickly shifted to demands and threats. She was behind on the house payments. Marcelo's business was failing. The children missed their grandmother. I owed it to my family to come home and fix the problems my absence had created. "You can't just run away from your responsibilities," Elena said during the second call. "Miguel and Sofia need their college funds. I need help with the mortgage. This is your family, Mom. You can't just abandon us because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." "It's not a midlife crisis," I replied. "I'm 75 years old. If anything, it's an end-of-life awakening. And I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not rescuing anyone anymore either." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're adults. You can solve your own problems or live with the consequences of not solving them. I'm not responsible for your choices anymore." Elena hung up on me. She didn't call again. Instead, she called the police in Barcelona, then the Spanish social services, then the American consulate, all with the same story. Her elderly mother was missing, possibly suffering from dementia, definitely unable to care for herself properly in a foreign country. The bureaucratic investigation that followed was thorough but brief. Spanish authorities interviewed me, reviewed my medical records, consulted with the American consulate, and concluded that I was a competent adult who had chosen to relocate internationally. Elena's reports were classified as unfounded and filed away. The consulate investigation was more interesting. The staff was familiar with cases of adult children filing false reports about elderly parents who had established independence in ways the children found financially inconvenient. "This happens more often than you might think," explained Sarah Wells, the consular officer who interviewed me. "Adult children get used to depending on their parents financially, then panic when the parents establish boundaries. Filing missing person reports or competency challenges is a common way to try to force elderly parents back into caretaking roles." Sarah provided me with documentation of the investigation and its conclusions. Official government records stating that I was mentally competent, financially stable, and legally free to live wherever I chose. It was protection against any future attempts by Elena to have me declared missing or incompetent. More importantly, it was validation. Objective confirmation from people with no emotional investment in our relationship that Elena's version of events was false. I wasn't a confused old woman making poor decisions. I was a competent adult who had finally learned to prioritize my own well-being. Barcelona became home gradually, then suddenly. The language lessons I started for practical reasons became genuinely enjoyable. The art classes I joined to meet people became a rediscovered passion. The walking tours I took as a tourist became regular exploration of neighborhoods I was learning to love. I made friends slowly but genuinely. Other expat Americans, local Spanish women my age, international residents from a dozen different countries. None of them knew anything about Elena or my history as a perpetual caretaker. They knew me as Carmen, the retired teacher from America who painted watercolors and made excellent almond cookies. The financial freedom was startling. Without Elena's constant emergencies, my pension covered my living expenses comfortably, with money left over for travel, classes, restaurant meals, and small luxuries I'd forgotten I enjoyed. David Park's analysis showed that Elena's financial dependency had been costing me almost $30,000 a year for the past decade. Money I'd never budgeted for because the requests came individually and were always framed as temporary emergencies. In Barcelona, that same $30,000 funded language lessons, art supplies, weekend trips to other European cities, and a level of personal independence I hadn't experienced since my 20s. I could make decisions based on what I wanted instead of what other people needed from me. The house situation in Phoenix resolved itself predictably. Elena missed 3 mortgage payments in my absence, The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Elena called Margaret in a panic, demanding that I resume the payments immediately to save the family home. Margaret explained that Elena had two choices. She could qualify for a new mortgage in her own name and buy the property from me at fair market value, or she could vacate the premises and allow me to sell it to someone else. There was no third option where I continued to be financially responsible for property that someone else controlled. Elena chose neither option. Instead, she hired another lawyer and tried to argue that my absence from the country proved I was mentally incompetent to make property decisions. The foreclosure was delayed while this new competency challenge worked its way through the court system. Margaret handled it efficiently. She submitted Dr. Martinez's evaluation, the Spanish consulate investigation, bank records showing my competent financial management in Barcelona, and recordings of Elena's previous threats and demands. The judge dismissed Elena's petition and allowed the foreclosure to proceed. Elena and Marcelo lost the house 6 months after I left for Spain. They moved into a rental property in a less expensive neighborhood. Elena took a full-time job for the first time in years. Marcelo closed his failing business and went back to working for other people. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I felt no guilt either. Elena's financial problems were the predictable result of Elena's financial decisions. For 43 years, I'd prevented her from experiencing the natural consequences of those decisions by providing bailouts whenever they were needed. Now she was learning to live within her means like most adults had to do. Margaret sold the house for me 9 months later. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance and legal fees, I netted $412,000. Combined with my existing savings and the pension income I'd been able to preserve by ending Elena's financial dependency, I was more financially secure than I'd ever been in my life. The money wasn't just financial security. It was proof that my sacrifices over the years had been real and substantial. Elena's casual dismissal of my contributions, her assumption that I owed her continued support regardless of how she treated me, had been economically as well as emotionally absurd. 2 years after leaving Phoenix, I received a letter that changed everything again. Not from Elena, but from Miguel and Sofia, now 15 and 13 years old. The letter was handwritten on school notebook paper, clearly composed by both children working together. It was mature beyond their years, thoughtful and careful in a way that suggested they'd planned every word. "Dear Grandma Carmen," it began, "we know you and Mom had a fight, and we know you moved to Spain. Mom told us you were sick and couldn't take care of yourself, but then she told us you were selfish and abandoned your family. We didn't know which story was true, so we looked up the court records online." The letter continued for 3 pages. Miguel and Sofia had researched our family situation independently, reading legal documents, financial records, and news articles about elder abuse. They'd figured out that Elena had been financially exploiting me for years and that my departure had been self-protection, not abandonment. "We understand why you had to leave," Sofia wrote. "We're sorry Mom said those terrible things to you on your birthday. We're sorry she made you feel like the only reason we loved you was because you gave us money. We love you because you're our grandmother, not because of what you buy us." Miguel added, "We're proud of you for standing up for yourself. Mom always taught us to stand up to bullies, but she got mad when you did it to her. We think you're brave for starting a new life in Spain. We hope someday we can visit you there." I cried reading that letter, not from sadness, but from relief. My grandchildren understood. They were old enough to see through Elena's version of events and mature enough to form their own opinions about family loyalty and respect. I wrote back immediately, a long letter explaining my side of the story in terms they could understand. I told them about the years of financial sacrifices, about Elena's threats to cut off my access to them, about the birthday phone call that finally made me realize I deserved better treatment. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," I wrote. "I left because I finally started loving myself enough to require respect from the people who claim to love me." That's a lesson I hope you remember when you're adults making your own decisions about relationships. I also made them a promise. When they turned 18 and were legally adults, they would be welcome to visit me in Barcelona. I would pay for their travel and show them the city I'd come to love. They could stay as long as they wanted and make their own decisions about family relationships based on their own experiences rather than their mother's interpretation of events. Elena discovered the correspondence and tried to stop it. She contacted the postal service, claiming that I was harassing her minor children. She threatened to file a restraining order if I continued writing to them. She told Miguel and Sofia that I was trying to turn them against their own mother. But Elena had miscalculated. Miguel and Sofia were old enough to make their own choices about family relationships and smart enough to see through her continued manipulation attempts. They set up their own email accounts and continued corresponding with me secretly. Over the next year, I watched my grandchildren mature into young adults who understood the difference between love and control. Miguel wrote about his college plans, his part-time job, his growing understanding that healthy relationships required mutual respect. Sofia shared her artwork, her thoughts about family dynamics, her excitement about possibly studying abroad someday. They were becoming the kind of adults I'd hoped Elena would become. Independent, thoughtful, capable of maintaining relationships without requiring constant financial or emotional support. The kind of adults Elena might have become if I'd established boundaries earlier instead of enabling her dependency for 43 years. 3 years after leaving Phoenix, I published my story online. Not as revenge against Elena, but as testimony for other women who might be trapped in similar patterns of family exploitation. The blog post was titled, "When Love Becomes Abuse, A Mother's Story of Financial and Emotional Manipulation by Adult Children." The response was overwhelming. Within a week, the post had been shared thousands of times. My email was flooded with messages from women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who recognized their own experiences in my story. "I thought I was the only one," wrote Margaret from Portland. "My son has been taking money from me for 15 years, and I always felt guilty for resenting it. Thank you for showing me that good mothers can still have boundaries. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 6 months because I refused to pay for her wedding," wrote Linda from Tampa. "Reading your story gave me the courage to stick to my decision. Family love shouldn't require bankruptcy. I'm 81 years old and just closed a joint account my daughter had been draining for years," wrote Dorothy from Seattle. "Your story saved me from dying, broke and unappreciated." A journalist from a women's magazine contacted me about doing a full interview. The article ran with the headline, "The Hidden Epidemic of Elder Abuse by Adult Children," and featured my story alongside research about financial exploitation of elderly parents. The magazine article led to radio interviews, podcast appearances, and invitations to speak at conferences about elder rights and family boundaries. Suddenly, I had a platform to address issues I'd never realized were so common. Elena's response to my public visibility was predictable. She hired a lawyer to demand that I stop defaming her in interviews and articles. She claimed that my public statements were damaging her reputation and affecting her employment opportunities. Margaret responded by threatening to file a countersuit for harassment. Elena's threats were documented attempts to silence my legitimate testimony about my own experiences. If Elena wanted to claim defamation, she would need to prove that my statements were false, which would require depositions, financial discovery, and potentially criminal investigation of her past behavior. Elena's lawyer withdrew the defamation threat within a week. Elena herself retreated into silence, apparently realizing that drawing more legal attention to our relationship would only generate more documentation of her exploitative behavior. Meanwhile, my new life expanded in directions I'd never imagined possible. A Spanish publisher contacted me about writing a book based on my story, not just a memoir, but a practical guide for older women dealing with financial and emotional abuse from adult children. When Love Hurts, A Mother's Guide to Surviving Family. Financial abuse took me 8 months to write. It combined my personal story with research about elder exploitation, interviews with other women who'd escaped similar situations, and practical advice about legal and financial protection strategies. The book was published simultaneously in Spanish and English. It became a bestseller in both languages, leading to international speaking engagements and translation into 8 additional languages. More importantly, it became a resource for women who had never before had language to describe their experiences. The book provided validation that family financial abuse was real, common, and not their fault. It offered concrete steps for establishing boundaries, protecting assets, and reclaiming independence. Elena made one final attempt to control the narrative. She wrote an article for a local Phoenix newspaper titled, "When Adult Children Lose Their Inheritance, A Daughter's Response to False Accusations." The article portrayed me as a mentally unstable woman who had abandoned her family and was now profiting from lies about her devoted daughter. The newspaper printed Elena's article, but they also contacted me for a response. I provided them with court documents, financial records, and testimonials from other family abuse survivors. The newspaper ran a follow-up article that included Elena's claims alongside factual documentation of the legal and medical evaluations that had contradicted her version of events. Elena's public attempt to discredit me backfired. The newspaper articles generated more attention for my book and more speaking requests from organizations working with elder abuse survivors. Elena had intended to silence me, but instead she'd amplified my message. Today, at 77, I live in a beautiful apartment overlooking the Mediterranean. The view from my balcony includes the Gothic Quarter, where I first walked as a confused tourist 4 years ago, and the beach where I now walk every morning as a confident resident. My financial situation is more secure than it's ever been. The book royalties, combined with my pension and the proceeds from the Phoenix house sale, provide comfortable income with substantial reserves for travel, healthcare, and unexpected opportunities. I have more money now than I did when I was supporting Elena's endless financial needs. More importantly, I have relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. My friends in Barcelona know me as someone interesting in my own right, not just as someone useful for solving other people's problems. My grandchildren correspond with me because they genuinely enjoy our connection, not because they're hoping for money. Miguel graduated high school last month and will attend college in California on a partial academic scholarship. He's earned the rest through his own part-time work, and he's proud of his independence. Sophia is developing into a talented artist who talks about studying in Europe someday. Both of them understand that love and respect go together, that healthy relationships don't require constant financial transactions. Elena sent me an email 6 months ago. It was shorter than her previous communications, less demanding, but not quite apologetic. She acknowledged that she may have taken advantage of my generosity over the years, and she said she hoped someday we could rebuild our relationship on better terms. I didn't respond to the email. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm finally content. Elena's acknowledgement is too little and too late to change our dynamic, but it's enough to confirm that my decision to leave was correct. Elena needed to lose my financial support to learn that her behavior had consequences. I needed to establish independence to learn that my worth wasn't dependent on my usefulness to other people. Neither of us could have learned these lessons while I was still enabling our old pattern. My disappearance wasn't punishment for Elena. It was a gift to both of us. Elena finally had to develop adult coping skills instead of relying on her mother's perpetual rescue. I finally got to discover who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's needs. Sometimes love requires distance. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for someone is stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family is the example of someone who finally learned to value herself enough to demand respectful treatment. I close my eyes on my Barcelona balcony each evening, listening to the sounds of the city I've chosen as my home, grateful for the courage that finally taught me the difference between loving someone and allowing someone to use my love as a weapon against my own well-being. Elena was wrong about one thing. The best gift I could give her wasn't my death. It was my disappearance, which forced her to finally grow up and forced me to finally start living. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is learn to love ourselves enough to walk away. And that was today's story about finding the courage to choose dignity over duty. If you enjoyed it, subscribe here. There are many more stories to come.